really appreciate everybody here to attend this conversation on climate change, consumer costs, and collective action. I am Drew Tower. I'm the Sustainability Campaign Manager here at Consumer Reports. I'm based in Alexandria, Virginia. Yes, I am the person behind those emails that I send you. Believe it or not, I am a real person. And I'm really happy to have you all here and to discuss this issue, this incredibly important issue. Again, as folks are still pouring in here, I want to let you know that this meeting is being recorded. Also want to let folks know that we are providing a copy of the recording after the webinar is over. So if you have friends or family that want to attend but couldn't make it, don't worry. As you come in, as I've mentioned, please just take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat. If you could give us your name, your city, favorite place to get outside, just a little bit about yourself. And yeah, really appreciate that. Thank you all so much. I'm going to pass it along to my colleague, Alan Smith, our community manager, who's going to read out some of the ground rules for this discussion. Alan?
Hi, y'all. Thank you all for being here. As Drew said, you're not going to be hearing much from me today, but I will be in the chat communicating with you there and trying to answer questions in Q&A. So thank you all for being here. Just a few quick things to get started. As Drew said, please introduce yourself. There's also a Q&A function that you should use if you want to log questions that we will try to get to the panelists as we go. We are recording this to share, as I hope the Zoom told you when you came in. And that just means that we will be able to send it around to you afterwards. So if you miss something that flies by in the chat, you will have another shot at it when we send you the recording. Also, before we get started, I'm going to go over some community rules for us all to abide by here. It's not going to matter. This is not going to be a problem. We're all going to have a fantastic time this evening, but we like to set the ground rules early so we have something to reference back to. So as a general code of conduct here at CR, we ask that you assume best intentions of all participants. That means Drew and I, also all of our speakers here, and then also your fellow attendees as we go. Please be mindful and understanding of your fellow participants who are coming from different experiences and different walks of life. Please speak from your own perspectives and your own stories, and please refrain from any personal attacks, and that includes comments on appearance or voice. Please just focus on the topics under discussion. So by attending this webinar, you are agreeing to those ground rules. This means that if you don't adhere to those rules, again, that's not going to happen today, but we do have permission to remove you from the discussion. And I'm just going to drop a link to those code of conduct ground rules into the chat, at which point I will disappear, hand it back to Drew, and we will be off to the races. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Alan. I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Alexandra, to discuss a little bit of background about the climate change report we released.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to see you. I'm so impressed with the geographic diversity we have from attendees on this webinar. We've got folks from all over the country. So I'm hoping we can cover some topics that are relevant to everybody. So I want to talk a little bit about why we decided to do this report. And as kind of an introduction for everyone, we often look at numbers when it comes to climate change as far as, what it's going to cost the world's economy, what it's going to cost the US economy. And these numbers are in the billions and trillions of dollars. And it's hard for people, including myself, to relate to when you're looking at your own finances and trying to figure out what your own expenses are going to be. So we wanted to dial it down, bring it down to an individual level so that consumers can think about how it's going to impact their family and their personal budget. The other factor is I just had a baby last October, and as a new mom, this really hits home. The study is for an American baby born in 2024, and this is what it's going to cost my son over his lifetime and an additional cost because of climate change. So it really hits home. We're looking at the impact of future generations, and that makes it a little more serious. If you go to the next slide, thanks. What we found was The costs from climate change are going to add up to about $500,000 for a baby born in the US in 2024. And that's over their lifetime if climate change continues to increase at the current pace it is right now. The study found that with more uncertain factors included, the cost is probably closer to $1 million. We were pretty conservative in our estimates. We didn't want to factor in certain things that we weren't sure about. So it, for all intents and purposes, is a large underestimate of what this is going to cost. Those numbers are due to an increased cost of expenses for things like food, housing, utilities, healthcare, and transportation. And then at the same time you see costs go up, you're going to look at people facing a reduction in income due to retirement income losses, increased taxes, and employment income losses. And it's hard to look at, but it's more, you're more able to internalize it as a real number for your, the budget over the course of your life rather than, it's going to cost $3.2 billion in the global economy or numbers like that. So thankfully, on the plus side, the extent of how much this is going to impact an individual's net income for future generations depends on our ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the near term. We can reduce this impact if we choose. These numbers don't have to be this high. We can lower them. Although some degree of climate change is unavoidable because, we've already ignored it for some time or, not made the progress that we need to make. There's still a lot of work to be done. Decisions made today are going to affect the future financial situation of our children and every child going forward. So your kids, your grandkids, they're going to deal with this if we don't deal with it today. Consumer Reports is working with consumers and policymakers and other stakeholders to advance clean energy, cleaner cars, improve home efficiency, and these changes and others can reduce consumer costs while helping improve the environment and public health. We know that individuals, we're all out there trying to make informed choices. We're doing our research, and Consumer Reports has tons of resources online to help you with this, reduce your home energy costs and make your homes more efficient, reduce tailpipe emissions from your cars. But we have a much larger impact if we work together and if we work to advocate for corporations and governments to do their part. With that, I want to introduce our moderator who has real life experience turning concern into action. Like me, she's a new mom. Caitlin Sanford is a mom of 2 young kids and co-president of Climate Action Rhode Island. She has worked in product research and data science, state government, and international development. After the birth of her daughter, she became quite motivated to shift her purchasing to more sustainable products and to get involved in local climate action. Caitlin?
Thanks, Alexandra. So nice to have everyone here joining us. Really nice to meet you all online. As Alexandra shared, in 2021, I came out of the bleary first days of having my first daughter. And I was coming from a kind of a background growing up in the woods of Oregon with eating from my mom's garden, having a lot of like organic food. So I was kind of coming into my having my baby as really wanting to be, concerned about the toxins in baby products, wanting to give her, the most natural things. And I was able to get on Consumer Reports and learn a lot about everything from sleep specs to the mattress to, different toys and things like, all the things that babies maybe need and maybe don't need, but it was really helpful. But through that journey, I was, having those long sleepless nights, kind of, waking up every few hours, and I'd be listening to podcasts and kind of doing my research. And I started just thinking about the future for my daughter and hearing that we were already getting to, 1.5 degrees Celsius warming, like what is the world going to be like for this next generation of kids growing up with these increasing natural disasters, where we are, it's like flooding, really heavy rains that didn't used to be the case. And I know all of you are experiencing similarly, strange and extreme weather events. So we're starting to feel it, right? And so I started listening to more and more like podcasts about climate change policy. I was working at a behavioral health technology company at the time, so not really anything related. Um, and I sort of got to thinking like, wait a minute, I'm buying these glass bottles instead of plastic bottles for my baby to drink out of. Like, that's great, but this isn't going to get us there. And sort of heard these stories that campaigns for recycling and things like that are actually really encouraged by fossil fuel companies to push the action back onto individuals for things that aren't even really that related to emissions, to make us feel like maybe we're doing something well, the things that contribute, massive amounts to our warming climate go continue on, right? So through that journey, I was just like getting more and more information, and there gets to a point where you're like, gosh, I should do more, right, than just kind of what I'm consuming, and even like looking for solar panels on my house or that sort of thing. And I was able to find some local groups. I reached out to a few of them, but Climate Action Rhode Island is a grassroots group of about 3,000 volunteers, well, 3,000 members, and some, smaller group of more um, active members. And that came out of the network of 350.org, which comes from like 350 parts per million, which was kind of the level of greenhouse gases at the time that Bill McKibben started that organization. So I just mentioned that because it is a national organization. And if any of you are also looking to get involved, there's chapters all around the country, and there's obviously lots of other great organizations. We're going to hear from them in a minute here. But that's one to get involved with. So we were at that group, our local group does a lot of political advocacy, endorsing climate champions for local office, do some protests and civil actions as well right now. As those of you who are in New England will know, there's a lot of offshore wind development happening, but there's also opposition and disinformation related to that. So we're doing a big like Yes to Wind campaign. And if anybody makes it to sort of the coast of Rhode Island, Cape Cod, there's a lot of like pro-wind and anti-wind yard signs that our group is putting out there, things like that. But if you want to go to the next slide really quick, and then we can go back to the panelists. We did a big action in 2021 in our state government to pass an act on climate and 100% renewable standard legislation. So what that did was actually mandate that the state of Rhode Island will become like effectively net zero by 2050, and we set targets for that, and it sets a plan for all elements of the government to transition to be fossil fuel free and reduce emissions on a progressive timeline up to 2050. And then 100% renewable energy standard mandates that all energy in Rhode Island will be from renewable sources by 2033, actually, which is one of the earliest targets for that, or they can be through RECs as well, the renewable energy credits. So it's one of the earliest targets to get there, granted a very small state. And, it was interesting being involved in so this is some of our group. It was still pandemic time, so with the masks on, but at the State House, we did like an LED display. So that was one of our actions, which was pretty cool to see. And actually the Senate president here, he's been in office for like 30 years. They're just kind of slow to take action because they don't feel the pressure as much, right? But he had actually had a challenger and almost lost his election. So after that election was really when, he started listening to constituent groups a bit more and opening things up for more influence. And, it's funny because my state senator, like, he only represents a relatively small number of people, so he knows me by name. And it just was an interesting experience to see how you don't need to impact that many people to make a change. And it's a small change, we're the smallest state, but it feels like something, and it felt really positive to get involved, to be working with others and like a multi-generational, multiracial coalition who's concerned about these things. So I think we can absolutely do both, right? Like be thinking about our consumer choices, because when things are a bit depressing and you can control that, and it feels really good to be informed of our purchasing decisions as well. But we can also be taking action wherever we are, right? And even if change at the macro levels is hard to influence, although some of our panelists like Rachel are influencing that. We can always take action on in wherever we are, right? And start where we stand, kind of grow where we're planted sort of idea. So happy to share that story, and thanks to Consumer Reports for all your wonderful information. Also many hours reading those reviews and all of that. So that was wonderful and exciting to see you getting into this work. So if we want to go back a slide, we can introduce our illustrious panel. So we have an amazing group of speakers, and we're going to hear from them about these very cool and exciting organizations. So Kyra Neumoff-Shields runs the Bright Cities program. She's the program director for Healthy Babies, Bright Futures. And this is a really amazing organization that is operating at so many levels with local municipalities on climate solutions, in addition to more like, helping families. And we're going to hear from Kyra about that. Rachel Cletus is the policy director for climate and energy at the Union of Concerned Scientists. We have Jasmine Gill, the associate senior director at Think 100%, and Stefan Coward, Justice Paid in Full campaign director. Both are from the Hip Hop Caucus. Really cool to hear what the Hip Hop Caucus is up to, bridging a lot of issues that might not seem as interrelated, but between financial access and climate impacts and all of that. So really excited to hear from the Hip Hop Caucus as well. So Kyra, let's turn it over to you and really hear about Healthy Babies, Bright Futures and the Bright Cities program. So if you could just share with us, introduce yourself, your organization, and the population your organization is working to impact. How are they feeling the impacts of climate change?
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and welcome everybody. It is just so exciting to see so many people from across the country being here. So we really appreciate you and your time. My name is Kyra Neumoff-Shields. As Caitlin said, I'm a mother and scientist, originally from Ohio. I saw a couple Ohioans in the room, but currently based in Boulder, Colorado, and the traditional home of the Arapaho people. By profession, I'm an exposure assessment scientist, but as I had my own kids, and my first child actually has ADHD, and I began to wonder about that, that led me to my current work at Healthy Babies, Bright Futures. And I do love this work so much, which I'm excited to tell you about, because it really gives me a chance to connect with motivated community residents, community organizations, and city staff to take action with a co-benefit for both reducing toxic chemicals and for climate. So what is Healthy Babies, Bright Futures, or HBBF? Well, the short story is that we really work to educate parents and health practitioners about safe baby foods. So that's one thing. We have a lot of resources online for all the parents and grandparents and people with kids in their lives that might be helpful. But we also work with cities through a small grants program, which is called Bright Cities, to take action that do two things. One is reduce neurotoxic exposures, and second is couple those with actions that promote climate resilience. So I'm going to focus, I'm going to go a little bit about the neurotoxics just to kind of share that. I feel it's really interesting how the panel is organized, so we have all different entry points into the climate work, because of course it's all part of the same puzzle. So let me share a little bit about the longer story about HBBF. It was founded in 2016 with a group of physicians, academics, health practitioners, and funders who came together to look at the literature and see where we could find the strongest link between toxic chemical exposures and neurodevelopment. I know the phrase neurodevelopment and neurotoxic exposures doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about lead and chemicals that act like lead that harm the developing brain. And to keep in mind that during the first few years of life, more than 1 million new neural connections are formed every second. So by age 2, almost all of the billions of brain cells that you ever have will be in place. So clearly any kind of disruption during this sensitive time can have lifelong impacts on learning, behavior, physical or mental health. So now I'm getting to the part where I'm talking about the link with climate, because clearly the future of our planet and our kids depends on addressing these two inextricably linked issues, climate change and toxic chemicals. Solving one without the other leads to a planet that's too warm or too toxic. And as we get excited about a summer coming up full of fun, we'll most also likely be peppered with heat and wildfires and climate impacts. And so, of course, the sustainable change is required. And so I have really tried to couple this reducing neurotoxic exposures with initiatives that cities and community groups are already taking that support climate work. And I'll pause here and can share those specific examples. And I do want to, either now, Caitlin, or if you want to give the other participants a chance to jump in here, we can return.
Yeah, I think you can go ahead and finish that thought. That sounds great. We'd love to hear more.
Okay, great. Well, I also want to highlight that all of these stories are on our website at hbbf.org. And really the whole idea is to share examples that have already worked so everybody can just replicate these ideas for free. So we try to promote 3 specific actions with cities and community-based organizations. You could do this in your neighborhood with the idea of moving towards collective action. And so the 3 I'll share, 2 of them are here on the screen. A wonderful project in South Portland, Maine. Some of you on the call from Maine may already know of this campaign called 100 Resilient Yards. And it was really a volunteer effort led by the city's sustainability office. And the idea was for residents, because municipal land in South Portland, Maine had already transitioned to water-wise and more chemical-free landscapes. And so there was still a large amount of residential land that could also become more resilient. So there were 5 specific land types: the pollinator garden, rain garden, vegetable garden, native planting or organic lawn, and community residents could apply to have some technical assistance, for example, soil testing, and also a master gardener coming on site, I think, for 2 hours to give a consultation. The city also provided some free planting. So they actually had over 400 people apply for the 100 spots. This happened last summer. It was a wonderful experience, and a huge co-benefit was the social connections that it fostered. I think I know in fact that the sustainability director was extremely pleased by that. And so it's going to kind of build out the social cohesion piece coming up this next summer. But they had t-shirts, yard signs, and a lot of technical materials that, again, are freely available if you want to try 100 resilient yards with your schools, churches, workplaces, or wherever you find community. So we can do resilient landscapes. Tree planting is always a wonderful activity that has co-benefits for reducing neurotoxic exposures. The trees can actually obviously provide cooling, but also sequester pollutants on their leaves, thus reducing pollutant concentrations. We worked in Phoenix and Tempe with a schoolyard with some tree planting. It was really cool. And in Tempe, the urban forester came up with a list of vegetation that you could plant that had the highest amount of pollutants that would deposit on the leaves, making co-benefits for these planting processes. We've also, worked in Columbia, South Carolina, a couple cities in Pennsylvania, a really great project in Petaluma, California, where they coupled the tree planting with youth job training. So tree planting, go for that. And the third and last strategy I'll share is environmentally preferable purchasing. So that's where you have a policy in place where the municipalities make a commitment to purchasing products that don't contain harmful chemicals, reduce carbon emissions, and produce less waste to obviously benefit health and the environment. And can really be a catalyst then for this large scale change that we're looking for, given the tremendous purchasing powers of our institutions, our local governments, our schools, our churches, our states' governments, and really has a great potential to move markets. And so we have a sample ordinance and a prioritization tool that allows cities to look through a database and look where they could get their most co-benefit in terms of purchasing for products that have a lower carbon footprint as well as a lower toxic chemical footprint. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kyra. So impressive, and thanks for your work on all of that, and really interesting to see how different cities are adapting it to their own local situations. Next, Rachel, would love to hear about the policy work with the Union of Concerned Scientists, and probably operating at a bit of a higher level, but also bringing together different elements of your group as well. So turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and thank you so much to all of you at Consumer Reports for hosting this panel. It's just a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the Union of Concerned Scientists. We're a science-based advocacy organization, and the core of our mission is that science belongs to everyone. It's not just an ivory tower exercise. And when we employ good science to inform policy, that's when we keep people safe. That's when we build a healthier planet, and not just for ourselves and our children, but also for the whole world. And the equity element of this, the justice element, is really critical. There are a lot of things we can do in our communities to ensure that the benefits we're seeking are available to everybody, not just the rich and the powerful. I see a lot of questions in the chat that show that you're attuned to this dynamic in our society. And as we implement climate policies, it's critical that we don't replicate the harms of the past and actually have more equitable policies to deliver benefits to all. So some of the work UCS has been doing has been in the space of pointing out the climate risks that are coming our way. As many of you know, we've seen year after year, month after month of record-breaking temperatures. 2023 was the hottest on record. This year is on track again. And it's not just the land temperatures, it's the ocean temperatures as well that are breaking records. And as a result, we've unleashed a range of really extreme impacts. Next slide, please. One of them is accelerating sea level rise, which is already causing tidal flooding on our coastlines. Even without storms and hurricanes, we're seeing coastal flooding worsen. And we did this research a few years ago called Underwater that looks at the harm to coastal real estate, primarily homes, but also commercial real estate from just high tide flooding. And the results were really startling. We have over 300,000 homes at risk within the lifetime of a 30-year mortgage issued today. I'll drop in the link to our Underwater page. There is a searchable GIS map at the bottom of that page. It's searchable down to the zip code level. You can go, if you live in any of these coastal states or know someone who does, you can search our database. It's all open access. We're using NOAA data. We're using the sea level rise projections from them. And one of the key pieces that we found as we were doing this work is that the market for the large part is not pricing this risk right now, but when it starts to react, and we're already seeing that now with the coastal insurance market, it has a really pernicious impact on individual consumers, like many of you. And what we have to understand is this is not just a price hit. These insurance companies are leaving consumers less protected. They're withdrawing from markets due to wildfire risks increasing, flooding risks increasing. And right now, our state regulators are not doing enough to make sure that consumers' interests are protected. So this is a really important area that is only going to get more and more problematic for individual homeowners if there isn't good public policy to support both flood mitigation measures as well as address some of these cost concerns. Next slide, please. Another area where we've been doing research is on the impacts of extreme heat. These, again, are scientific projections going out to mid-century based on projections of how climate change is going to influence heat. And I want to circle back to something Alexandra said, which is that we have choices. This is not written in stone. Our choices today matter hugely in terms of the emissions that we release, in terms of the heat that we'll face in mid-century and beyond. Heat is one of those classic signatures of climate change. It's something we can really bring under control if we cut our emissions sharply. Sea level rise, on the other hand, unfortunately, we're setting off some very long duration processes, like the loss of land-based ice, that once we set it off, it's very hard to put that genie back in the bottle. So very, very sobering for all the coastal cities and economies that we have. And with this heat work, we also looked at the impact on outdoor workers. And that is one of the really stunning pieces that we found, that outdoor workers are on track to collectively lose over $55 billion in earnings by mid-century because of this rise in extreme heat. And that's the kind of impact that the Consumer Reports study that Alex pointed to is trying to raise attention for. All of these outdoor workers, policemen and women, postal folks, folks working on our farms who help us put food on the table, construction workers, they're all incredibly vulnerable to extreme heat. And right now, we don't have a national heat health safety standard. It's unbelievable. We really have to catch up with the science and make sure that workers are protected. There is a bill in Congress that has been introduced multiple times, the Asuncion Valdivia Extreme Heat Act, and that is an act that really has to get across the finish line so that we can make sure outdoor workers are protected. It goes without saying that heat is really hard on the elderly and young people because their bodies are less able to regulate that heat. And so young children playing sports outside, for example, are very vulnerable to heat. And we're seeing this heat come earlier in the year and last longer into fall. I'm in the Northeast. Many of our schools here are not built with air conditioning, even though we're starting to see heat get worse. And if you're in the Southeast, you know how harmful to health this kind of extreme heat can be. And yet a lot of our public housing is not built with air conditioning. So we have a lot of people that are very, very vulnerable, and they may not be able to afford running air conditioners, even if they have them, because of the high electricity bills. Next slide, please. One of the things that we're trying to do in real time is we maintain this map that we call our danger season map. This is a snapshot from July last year, where we simultaneously had the southwest of the country in an extreme heat wave, and Vermont experiencing extraordinary flooding. You all might remember this from last year. Unfortunately, wherever you lived in this country, you felt climate change last year, whether it was the smoke wafting from wildfires hundreds of miles away, or extreme heat, hurricanes, intensified hurricanes carrying a lot more moisture because the air is warmer, it can carry more moisture. We're setting up for a terrible hurricane season this year because of the really warm oceans. There's a lot of energy there as these storms move across. And so being prepared is critical, being prepared ahead of time, not just reacting as if these are one-off disasters. And that's the other piece of our advocacy. We're doing a lot around climate resilience, making sure that we have the money, the funding up front, which is really lacking in communities, especially smaller communities, and also making sure that we're thinking about resilience as we invest going forward, whether we're investing in infrastructure or housing, that we're building it to be efficient, powered by clean energy and climate resilient. I'll stop there, and thank you so much for this opportunity to share this work with you.
Fantastic, very sobering and interesting, Rachel. Thank you for packing so much in a short summary there. Next, we have the privilege of hearing about two really impactful campaigns from the Hip Hop Caucus. So Jasmine Gill, Stefan Coward, I'll turn over to you to introduce the caucus and these two campaigns that you're working on. And Jasmine, if you want to just pass it over to Stefan, feel free.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm actually going to introduce my colleague. First, allow him to introduce his title with the Hip Hop Caucus, and then I'll introduce myself and kick us off into who is a Hip Hop Caucus and what do we actually do. Stefan, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, everybody. My name is Stefan Coward. I am the Justice Paid in Full Campaigns Director for Hip Hop Caucus. I live in the areas that you're talking about. I'm originally from Louisiana, but I'm based here in Dallas, Fort Worth, and I can attest, yes, like it was very hot, increasingly hot. So thank you for like uplifting that work. And I'm happy to be here with you to talk about the cross section with climate and economic justice. I'll pass it back.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Everyone, I'm Jasmine Gill. I'm the Associate Senior Director for our Think 100% work. The Hip Hop Caucus is a national nonpartisan nonprofit that connects culture and hip hop to the civic process for people in our nation. You may be asking yourself why hip hop. Hip hop is the most popular, most influential genre in music history, even more popular than the Beatles. And that's not Jasmine Gill saying that. That is based on research. Hip hop actually celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. And what we do know is the influence that this music has. And what we like to tell people is politics and policy is temporary and art is forever. And so that's why we intertwine art and music into this work, and the folks who are musicians and artists in their work into this process. This September, actually, the caucus will be celebrating its 20th anniversary, so we're almost at drinking age. And our mission is to create a more just, sustainable world and engaging people, particularly young people and people of color, into the civic and policy process. Can you go to the next slide, please? We do this work in 4 main issue areas. The first is voting and democracy protection in progress. That is through our campaign known as Respect My Vote. And then we also do this work by fighting for solutions in climate change and environmental justice. That is my leg of the work, the Think 100% program. We also lead in partnering in critical civil and human rights issues. That is our department known as Good Trouble. And lastly, we do this work through advocating for a just economy for everyone and work on investing more into our communities versus harming them. And that is through Stefan's work through Justice Paid in Full. The next slide, please. Given this report and the findings that the Consumer Reports team have already shared with you all earlier, it only makes sense for us to talk about our Think 100% work and how we see these costs impacting our BIPOC communities every day. What we do know is that Black and Brown folks are on the front lines of receiving the brunt of this climate crisis, but we also know that they are disproportionately impacted, meaning that they not only live in these areas that experience the highest rate of climate change, but they're also on purpose being placed more near pollution than any other communities that we see. But first, we should think about how do we prioritize and tackle such a huge issue, right? Sometimes climate change can feel so massive that sometimes people maybe walk away feeling a little hopeless, right? And the caucus does not believe in that perspective. We believe in giving people hope and letting them know the solution is possible. And so the caucus angle is the same as what you've seen in this report, which is that these issues can be fixed mostly at large by focusing on not only corporations and huge industries that have created this problem for us in pollution, but also focusing on institutions that have furthered our dependency on factors that further pollute our communities. Next slide, please. So with the Think 100% program, specifically the work that I lead with the caucus, our priorities really land in most of these buckets. The first being stopping new and existing fossil fuel industry. That includes oil and gas, LNG, liquefied natural gas, if you all don't know, and petrochemical work as well. The second way we do this is through transportation justice. This is not only through clean energy vehicles, but also through like heavy duty, the massive trucks that you see on the road quite often. Some of that is a part of that transportation justice as well. Third is through clean air and clean water. We will constantly be fighting for this because there are so many communities that are still without those things due to some of the work that you've already seen before from some of our peers and colleagues. Fourth is through expanding access to urban green spaces. And then lastly, we do this work by investing, tracking, and implementing policies that fund BIPOC communities through solutions like the Inflation Reduction Act or J40 programs and so much more. But if I had to highlight where our work lands, is typically in one of these buckets. Next slide, please. how does this actually work in practice, right? You know, where we do it, how we do it, but what does it actually look like on a day-to-day basis? If I had to describe it, it would be through one of these three kind of phases. The first one is always relationship building. Community comes first. This is the one that people underestimate the most, but it's the one that counts the most. These people are on the ground every single day. They know what the impacts are because they have to deal with them on a daily basis. They've been the ones that have been doing the work for years to fight and combat some of these issues. And so with that understanding, they also understand the political landscape of what needs to happen and what the community needs. And so the caucus always centers that first. And with that being said, that moves into our second step, which is us, you know, being aligned on what the strategy should be for that community. What should we be implementing and fighting for, and making sure that the community is always at the center of those solutions when we move forward on any sort of strategy. And then lastly, we put those things into practice by pushing for solutions and justice through education, engaging people, mobilizing and tracking our progress. A great example of this is our Department of Justice Paid in Full, where we created the Bank Black and Green program that Stefan will talk about. And this report, I think if there's anything I want you to take away mostly, is that what we digested is that two things are happening, right? There is first, the climate sustainability that needs to happen, but then second, we need the economic sustainability and understanding how those two worlds intersect. So with that being said, I'll let my colleague Stefan talk more about that intersection and how these things go in tandem.
I truly appreciate that. And if we go to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more about my name. Again, my name is Stefan Coward, and I lead our economic justice work, and it's called Justice Paid in Full. And so this work, it speaks to the intersections of multiple issue areas that Jasmine has already mentioned, right? But for the sake of today, what I want to do is we're going to talk about how climate action and economic justice, that connection between the two. And there's this huge cross section that we created with this campaign known as Bank Black and Green, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. And so to tell you a little bit about Bank Black and Green, this is a divest invest campaign with the intention of getting large banks and to publicly commit to say that they will not be a part of financing the fossil fuel industry or other part of it, mass incarceration. But the goal that we see is that if we can get these smaller institution, minority-owned banks to be able to take the moral authority of saying that we will not invest in these harmful industries, we see this as an opportunity as not only an organizing to organize people, but a messaging campaign to say if smaller institutions who are undercapitalized, undersupported can do this, there's no reason why the larger financial institutions who have the capital and resources cannot do the same. And so what we see is that we're rallying impact investors who have pledged over the numbers, like several $1 trillion in capital that they're saying that people are devoting to the shaping of this regenerative economy that we want to be able to create. And so the goal is to be able to align that capital with these financial institutions who are predominantly built in those areas that we saw in Rachel's picture of across the South and the East Coast, these areas that are climate impacted. And so what we see is when these financial institutions get this type of capital, we want them to redeploy this capital and to invest in reparative community health and infrastructure projects, like investing in our public health and safety of our community. And so what we see is that this campaign is again, aligning value-based impact investors to show that Black-owned banks, minority-owned banks can be a model of how balance is created between community, environmental justice, and shareholder needs. This people, planet, profit approach is something that I feel like it has not been fully fleshed out by the industry as a whole, right? And signing on to this Bank Black and Green campaign would show that investors and consumers that Black-owned banks are forward-thinking, transparent, have courageous leadership, and to name a few other areas, I feel like this program and department also fights for, of course, support and basic essential consumer financial protections for when it comes to insurance companies, prescriptions, other things that disproportionately impact BIPOC communities. We want to end discriminatory practices that negatively impact our returning citizens, people who were formerly incarcerated, combating gender and racial economic disparities to close what we all know is these wage gaps, these housing lack of access to that, and other economic indicators that you hear in these reports. And so we also want to support reforms that provide humanity to those who are unhoused. Those many people who are unhoused live in these southern areas. And what I say to this, like, as we're going into this next slide, is saying that something that I talk about a lot is the impact that we have, corporate social responsibility. When I was in grad school, I got my master's in sustainability, and one of the things that we talk about is that we have to live life and do business in a way that does not compromise the ability of our next generation to be able to do the same. And so how I took that, and it rings in my ear all the time, and how I took it is saying that businesses have a social license to operate, and as consumers, we have the ability to revoke that. And so as we are talking about this campaign, what we believe is that our theory of change is that we're establishing trust in these underfunded financial institution, and utilizing this pledge as both like an organizing tool and a source of accountability. It's educating and establishes trust for those who are saying that I want to bank for good. I want to be able to move my money to a financial institution who does not invest in this extractive economy that we're currently existing in. Of course, we're not in the business of trying to trade one oppressor for the next. So therefore, there's an accountability piece. We want to make sure that this capital goes. And as you can see with this campaign, we have phases. The first phase is just getting people to say that they're not going to do business with any new entities who fund these harmful industries. And as each financial institution goes through this process, that the goal is to be able to say that if you do have any banking in any of these industries, let's set up an exit strategy to be able to remove them out of your portfolio. Being working in the banking industry for the last 20 years, it is possible. When they tell you that they can't, they can, because I was actually over the department that did that type of work. And so the broader goal is to be able to say that with this moral authority that we're having and doing this campaigning, the goal is to say that we don't want to do business with anybody who does businesses with those institutions. And as you can see, as you continue to go down this pipeline, more and more impact investors are going to be redeploying capital into helping our community. And so that is the Bank Black and Green campaign. And if you want to learn more, go to Hip Hop Caucus, and we can tell you more about it.
Fantastic. So interesting. Thanks, Stefan. Thank you, Jasmine. We had a great question come through from Al, who says, how do we get those in power who either don't see the problem, have not experienced firsthand? I think especially these issues that you're sharing about, redlining and access to banking services, and having your bank kind of represent your community, or, these environmental justice issues that thankfully are starting to have, become more part of the conversation, but still have a ways to go. So how do we get those in power to see what's happening in the lives of many? Maybe we can hear from Hip Hop Caucus first and then go back to the other panelists.
Sure, I can start off first, Stefan, and you can add in if you like. That's a very loaded question, and I think the most impact, I always, going back to my roots, is through storytelling. Nothing impacts people more than you telling your personal story and working with the right organizations that know how to tell that story very well. And so amplifying stories, whether it be through paid media, earned media, and amplifying the voices of those that are of impact. You can't deny when someone has lost their home due to a horrific extreme weather event. You can't deny when someone has lost a loved one due to the climate change impacts that we see every day in some of these communities. And so those stories hit the hardest and last the longest in the minds of elected officials, in my personal opinion. My second piece of advice is really utilize to your advantage where those elected officials live. It is not a doubt in my mind that everyone in this nation is experiencing climate change in some form or fashion, whether that be through extreme weather, the loss of food and agricultural crops, through living near areas that are heavily polluted due to some of these industries, high asthma, cancer rates, things of that nature. In some way, shape, or form, either they personally or their constituents are being heavily impacted by these things, right? And it's their responsibility to respond to those issues. And so I think that's the second thing, right? Is finding what is the catalyst for that particular elected official to pay attention, and then using that to your advantage to build on what storytelling opportunities you should focus on. So I think those are two kind of low lifting ways to start that process. Of course, there are other high level ones, but just the ones at the top of my mind. Stefan, did I leave out anything or anything you would want to suggest?
No, I think it was spot on. The only thing I would add in addition to that is just reminding consumers that you have power. Your dollars have power, and you have a choice to say, like, where do you want to bank, or like, where do you want to spend your money? And again, these institutions have social license to operate. We can revoke it if we don't believe that they align with our values.
Right, great point. Kyra, parents, we were so immediately concerned with our own, children's development, and we, could come at this from that perspective. But I imagine your group is also influencing those. I think about those in power as not being the most as focused in like that same way, right? They might be disconnected from those issues, or might have privileges where they haven't been exposed to, lead in old homes, or those sort of things. So how would you think that we can have those in power who maybe haven't experienced these issues directly to take action?
Well, Jasmine and Stefan, I can only echo what you said. I really appreciated the power of storytelling, and that's one strategy we use as well. In our realm, one area where we have had some impact is through testing. And so this is slightly adjacent to climate change, but when we tested baby foods from across the nation, from all kinds of parents' homes, all kinds of brands across the board, we found heavy metals in these baby foods. So letting people know that this impact personally impacts them was a way for us to actually reach the FDA and begin more conversations and help shape their plan closer to zero. So that's one way that I think our organization has been impactful. At the city level, just telling the story is working, but as we sometimes know, change is slow, and so we just have to be persistent.
Yep, absolutely. Rachel, what do you think from, more direct kind of lobbying efforts? What lessons have you learned?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on the power of storytelling. And maybe to add to that, I would just say that it's so easy when you think about climate change to get very worried, maybe, lose hope, be gloom and doom. And I think it's critical to start from a point of connecting around solutions as well, because we have solutions, whether it's building resilience or transforming to clean energy. But at their core, these are not incremental solutions. They really do require systems change, transformative change. And I think many of you are experiencing some version of what's unequal and unfair in our society right now. So when people say it's going to cost a lot to deal with climate change, the starting point should be it's costing us a lot right now. It's been costing us, and it's been disproportionately costing communities of color. So can we build a fairer world as we solve this challenge? And what I find really interesting about all of our comments is, while the problem seems like it's a multi-headed hydra, often the solutions are common solutions that can work along multiple fronts. So if you create, say, a fairer access to capital and banking, what Stefan was talking about, you can actually create communities that thrive economically as well. You can have healthier communities, children in those communities can thrive, and you can cut emissions. It's not just about swapping gasoline-powered cars for electric vehicles. That's important, but we need mobility and transit that's accessible and affordable to all, mass transit. We need this in rural places, not just urban places. So if we start thinking about these as systemic solutions, and I'd encourage us to also think about the bad guys, because there are bad guys in this story. And the fossil fuel companies are earning billions in profits. They're still expanding fossil fuels, even as we're seeing these record-breaking extreme weather events, and they're asking for taxpayer money all the time. So as Stefan was saying, we can revoke their social license. We can take them on. We can say, hey, time's up. We need to clean energy very quickly. And everything that's happening here in the United States, it's magnified in countries that have fewer resources and are less wealthy than our nation. Countries that have emitted very little in terms of heat trapping emissions, but are now finding themselves on the front lines of this climate crisis. So I guess I would encourage us to think about connections. Start with those small conversations where you can find a point of connection and emphasize with something in someone's life. They may not be saying climate with a capital C. They might be worried about, bread and butter, just how do I get food on the table every day? And understanding where they are, meeting them where they are, is critical. And I guess just since I work for the Union of Concerned Scientists, one thing that's been very, very harmful is misinformation and disinformation about the facts, any subject, whether it's the elections or climate change. Facts themselves are being contested, and we all have a role in making sure that that misinformation and disinformation doesn't proliferate. When you're on social media, think about that and really ask for better ask these social media companies to do a better job of monitoring this proliferation of disinformation, especially as we, in the lead up to the election, this is going to be really, really important.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. But it is empowering that we can take these steps and challenge these actors at all levels. So thanks to all our panelists. Drew, I'll turn over to you to get in, I believe, a poll. But thank you to everyone for sharing your amazing organizations. And I learned so much. The time really flew by, but let's all read more about the organizations as well. Drew.
Yes, thank you so much. Wow, what a great group of speakers here. You all should have just gotten a poll. You've heard some really great campaign work that's going on in the climate space, and we want you all to help shape what CR is going to be working on into the future. So this is just a quick pulse check to understand what issues are resonating with you as a CR supporter. I want to note that this is not an either-or question. Please feel free to place a check mark next to multiple boxes if you feel it's important to work on more than one issue that's listed there. I also want to note that we have a sign-up page active for folks that want to join CR's ongoing climate efforts. You can find that through this link I just posted in the chat. And please share that with your friends and family. Oh, okay, we got the poll back up. The poll is back up. Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, that should be great. So CR has a range of work that we're planning out into the future. In addition to this push on climate, we're working to engage consumers to purchase more sustainable products in the marketplace through our Green Choice program. You can just look for the green symbol on our website as you browse. We're also looking to make sure consumers have access to clean and efficient vehicles by setting strong standards for pollution coming from cars and trucks and pushing to expand the number and reliability of electric vehicle charging stations. On the horizon, we're watching some upcoming Supreme Court decisions that could affect democracy and the ability for consumers to make those sustainable choices in the marketplace. So I want to stress that this is just the beginning of this work. This is just the beginning of this journey here at CR. And we're so happy to have these panelists here to help us start this journey. I think we're starting to get some great responses from the polls. Thank you so much for that. I want to close by thanking our expert panelists for taking the time to share the amazing work that you all are doing to bring folks together around this critically important issue. Again, thank you all for attending, and hope you're maybe a little bit more hopeful about the ability to make progress on this issue than you were when you came in. Quick reminder, we're going to send a copy of this recording out within the next few days. And meanwhile, I hope you all have a great rest of your night. Thank you all so much.